After the betrayal, Nick Hardaway learned that foundations built on sand will eventually collapse. 2 weeks before his wedding, he discovered his fiancée Eliza in the arms of Gerald Wagner, not just any man, but his trusted mentor of 5 years. The dual betrayal shattered everything Nick thought he knew about love, loyalty, and his carefully mapped future. While most men would crumble, Nick Hardaway wasn't most men. The pain became his fuel. He walked away from his prestigious position at Blackstone Capital to build something authentic. Nexus Financial Solutions. Every sleepless night, every rejected pitch, every moment of doubt pushed him further from the man Eliza had left behind. As Nick's company gained traction and his innovative approach to ethical finance disrupted the industry, she watched from the sidelines. Eliza saw the empire rising from the ashes of what she destroyed. Her messages started as casual check-ins, grew into apologies, and finally escalated to desperate pleas for reconciliation. Then came the rainy night when she showed up at his door, mascara-streaked tears rolling down her face, begging for a second chance. The same woman who had betrayed him now stood before him, broken and remorseful, while he stood tall and complete without her. The power had shifted, the tables had turned. Nick faced a choice that would define not just his future, but who he had become in the aftermath of devastation. Would he welcome back the woman who shattered his heart, or had he finally realized his worth ran deeper than her validation? Buckle up, get ready, and subscribe for a special surprise tomorrow. Nick Hardaway adjusted his tie in the restroom mirror of Blackstone Capital's downtown offices. The crisp Windsor knot and perfectly pressed navy suit projected exactly what the firm's youngest senior investment banker wanted the world to see: success, precision, and unwavering control. At 33, he had climbed faster than most, with a corner office that overlooked the city skyline and a salary that had already paid off his student loans from Princeton and Wharton. The quarterly performance review with the partners had gone exceptionally well. It hinted at a potential executive position opening by year's end, a full decade ahead of his meticulously crafted career timeline. Nick checked his watch, custom-made, a gift from Eliza on their 2-year anniversary, and noted he had just enough time to pick up the engagement ring from the jeweler before heading home. His phone buzzed with a message from Gerald Wagner. "Great work today. They're impressed. Drinks tomorrow to discuss next steps." Nick smiled. Gerald had been more than a mentor these past 5 years. He'd been the guiding force behind Nick's rapid ascent. As head of investment strategy and the firm's most respected partner, Gerald had taken an interest in Nick from his first day as an analyst. Raw talent needs proper direction, Gerald had told him, and Nick had absorbed every lesson, every connection, every opportunity Gerald had provided. He texted back a quick confirmation and slipped the phone into his pocket. In 2 weeks, he'd be married to Eliza Winters, the brilliant art dealer who had captured his heart at a gallery opening 3 years ago. In a few months, he'd likely be announced as the firm's newest executive partner. Life was unfolding according to plan. The memory of meeting Eliza still brought an involuntary smile to his face. He'd attended the gallery opening reluctantly, dragged along by Darius, his best friend since college. "You need culture in your life, man," Darius had insisted. "All you do is work and sleep." Nick had been studying a particularly striking contemporary piece when a voice beside him asked, "Do you see the contradiction in the brushstrokes, or are you just pretending to understand modern art like everyone else here?" He turned to find Eliza watching him with amused skepticism, her dark hair falling in waves around a face that managed to be both elegant and mischievous. "I was actually thinking it reminds me of the market volatility charts I've been analyzing all week," he'd admitted. Instead of walking away, she laughed. "Finally, someone honest. I'm Eliza Winters, associate curator." Nick Hardaway, boring investment banker. "Well, Nick Hardaway, boring investment banker, let me show you something that might actually speak to your analytical mind." She'd led him through the gallery, explaining pieces in terms of investment value, historical context, and market trends. By the end of the night, they'd exchanged numbers. 3 years later, they were planning a wedding at the same gallery where they'd met. Nick collected the ring, a 3-carat emerald-cut diamond on a platinum band, and decided to stop by the grocery store. He'd cook dinner tonight, something he rarely had time to do. Eliza had mentioned wanting a quiet night in, and he'd planned to surprise her with her favorite bottle of Bordeaux and the concert tickets he'd managed to secure for the following weekend. When he turned his key in the lock of their downtown apartment, Nick was already loosening his tie, prepared for a relaxing evening. The sound hit him first, a muffled laugh from the bedroom. Eliza wasn't supposed to be home for another hour. "Eliza, he called out, setting down the grocery bags and wine. The sudden silence was deafening. Then came hurried movements, whispers. Something cold and heavy settled in Nick's stomach as he moved toward the bedroom. The door was partially open. He pushed it wider. Elisa stood by the bed, hastily wrapping herself in a silk robe, her face flushed and hair disheveled. But it was the second figure that caused Nick's world to tilt sideways. Gerald Wagner, his mentor, frantically pulling on trousers. "Nick," Elisa gasped, "you're home early." The grocery bags slipped from his fingers. The wine bottle shattered on the hardwood floor, red liquid seeping outward like blood. "How long?" Nick's voice came from somewhere far away, as if someone else was speaking through him. Gerald started, "Nick, this isn't what." "Don't." Nick cut him off, his eyes fixed on Elisa. "How long?" Elisa's face crumpled. "Almost a year." The room seemed to shrink and expand simultaneously. A year. Nearly a third of their relationship. While he'd been working late, planning their future, she'd been with Gerald, his mentor, his friend. "The Tokyo merger," Nick said flatly. "When I was in Japan for 2 weeks. That's when it started." It wasn't a question, but Elisa nodded anyway, tears streaming down her face. "I need you both to leave," Nick said, his voice unnervingly calm. "Now?" Gerald attempted to approach him. "Nick, let me explain." "If you say another word to me, I will destroy your career," Nick replied, the ice in his tone making it clear this wasn't an empty threat. "Get out." They gathered their things in silence. Nick stood motionless in the living room as Gerald slipped past him without eye contact. Elisa tried to touch his arm. He recoiled as if burned. "Nick, please," she whispered. "We need to talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. The wedding is off. I'll have my things out by tomorrow." He placed the ring box on the coffee table. "You can keep the apartment." After they left, Nick sat alone in the darkened living room until sunrise, the shattered wine bottle and ruined groceries still on the floor. The carefully constructed framework of his life had collapsed in an instant. Every memory with Elisa was now tainted, every career triumph under Gerald's guidance now hollow. The days that followed passed in a haze. Nick moved mechanically through the necessary steps, canceling wedding arrangements, moving into a sterile corporate apartment, drafting a brief email to guests citing irreconcilable differences. He told no one the truth, not even Darius, who called repeatedly with increasing concern. At work, Nick arrived early and stayed late, taking routes through the building that ensured he wouldn't encounter Gerald. He declined meeting invitations, communicated only through email, and buried himself in client portfolios. Colleagues commented on his pallor, the dark circles under his eyes, but he deflected with mentions of a demanding new project. Nights were the worst. Sleep evaded him, leaving Nick to stare at the ceiling of his new apartment, replaying moments with Elisa and Gerald, searching for clues he'd missed. The late meetings, the weekend conferences, the casual mentions of running into each other at industry events. All of it now recontextualized as opportunities for betrayal. He stopped answering personal calls entirely. His parents, concerned about the abrupt wedding cancellation, left voicemails that went unreturned. Darius eventually resorted to showing up at the office, only to be told by Nick's assistant that he was unavailable. The whispers followed him through the office corridors. The specifics of the betrayal remained private, but the sudden cancellation of a high-profile wedding and Nick's visible withdrawal fueled speculation. Some attributed it to cold feet, others to some hidden scandal. Nick ignored it all, focusing solely on the numbers in front of him, the only thing that still made sense. A month after discovering the affair, Nick sat in a partners' meeting where Gerald was presenting the firm's quarterly strategy. It was their first direct interaction since that night. Gerald faltered momentarily when their eyes met, but Nick's face remained impassive, betraying nothing of the rage and hurt that still coursed through him. After the meeting, Gerald attempted to corner him in the hallway. "Nick, we need to clear the air. What happened was inexcusable, but it's affecting the team dynamic." Nick regarded him coldly. "I'm performing above expectations on all my accounts. If you have concerns about my work, put them in writing." "This isn't about your work. It's about moving forward professionally despite." "There isn't no us," Nick interrupted. "There's you, there's me, and there's a line you crossed that can't be uncrossed. We work in the same building. That's the extent of our relationship now." As Nick walked away, Gerald called after him. "She ended things with me, you know. Right after you found out. She loves you." Nick kept walking, his steps never faltering, even as something inside him shattered all over again. 6 weeks after the betrayal, Nick sat across from Thomas Reed, the managing director of Harrington Global Investments, in an upscale restaurant overlooking the city. The lunch meeting had been arranged through a mutual connection, ostensibly to discuss potential synergies, but Nick knew a recruitment pitch when he saw one. "Frankly, Nick, word about your situation at Blackstone has made the rounds," Reed said, cutting into his steak. "Whatever happened with Wagner, it's created an opportunity for you to make a strategic move. We're prepared to offer you a managing director position with a substantial signing bonus and equity options." Nick took a measured sip of water. The offer was exceptional, considerably better than his current compensation package. A direct leap to managing director would accelerate his career timeline by at least 5 years. "You'd have your own team," Reed continued, correctly interpreting Nick's silence as negotiation rather than hesitation. "Complete autonomy on client selection, and a fresh start away from whatever unpleasantness occurred with Wagner." Nick placed his napkin beside his barely touched meal. "It's a generous offer, Thomas. I appreciate the consideration." "Sleep on it," Reed suggested, sliding a folder across the table. "The formal offer is inside. We need an answer within the week." That night, Nick stood at his apartment window, the city lights blurring as he stared unseeing at the skyline. The Harrington offer represented everything he'd been working toward. A clear path upward, away from the daily possibility of encountering Gerald in the elevator or hearing colleagues whisper about why the wedding had been called off. Yet something felt hollow about it. Another prestigious firm, another corner office, another series of 100-hour weeks serving the same ultra-wealthy clients with the same investment strategies. Different business card, same life. Nick's gaze fell on the camera bag pushed to the back of his closet, untouched for years. Photography had been his passion in college before practical concerns about student loans and career stability pushed him toward finance. Eliza had encouraged him to take it up again, but something always seemed more important at work. In a moment that felt both impulsive and inevitable, Nick opened his laptop and drafted 2 emails. The first declined Harrington's offer with sincere thanks. The second was his resignation from Blackstone Capital, effective immediately. By morning, Nick felt a clarity he hadn't experienced since before the betrayal. He called Darius, who answered on the first ring despite the early hour. "I was starting to think you'd changed your number," Darius said, a mixture of relief and irritation in his voice. "I quit my job," Nick replied. A brief silence. "Do you want me to pretend to be surprised, or can we skip to the part where I ask what took you so long?" They met at Darius's loft, which doubled as the headquarters for his tech startup. After 3 years of bootstrapping, D2 Innovations had recently secured significant venture capital funding for its privacy-focused social media platform. "So, what's the plan?" Darius asked, pouring coffee into mismatched mugs. "Besides avoiding human contact and ignoring my calls." Nick accepted the coffee. "I'm starting my own firm." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Bold. Suicidal, maybe, but bold. What's your angle?" "Ethical investment for underserved communities. Focusing on sustainable returns rather than quick profits. Transparency in fee structures." The ideas had crystallized overnight, drawn from years of seeing what worked and what felt increasingly hollow in traditional finance. "You mean actually helping people instead of just helping rich people get richer?" Darius grinned. "Wagner must be having a stroke." At the mention of Gerald, Nick's jaw tightened. Darius noticed. "You know, at some point you're going to have to tell me what actually happened." Nick stared into his coffee. "Eliza was having an affair with Gerald. For almost a year." Darius's grin vanished. "Holy shit. Both of them? That's why you've been a ghost for weeks." Something in Nick cracked open, the story spilling out for the first time since it happened. Darius listened without interruption, his expression darkening. "I should beat the crap out of both of them," Darius said when Nick finished. "Not worth it," Nick replied, surprised to realize he meant it. "I'm done letting them determine my next move." Darius nodded slowly. "So this new firm, how can I help?" The next weeks were a blur of activity. Nick secured a small office space in a building that housed several other startups, including a corner previously used as Darius's storage area. They repurposed old furniture, set up basic infrastructure, and Nick began the painstaking process of creating a business plan for what he was calling Nexus Financial Solutions. Without Blackstone's resources and reputation, building a client base proved challenging. Nick reached out to smaller accounts he'd managed personally, explaining his new venture. Some wished him well but stayed with the established firm. Others took meetings but hesitated to commit. By the end of the first month, Nick had secured only 2 modest clients, nowhere near enough to sustain the business long term. During a particularly frustrating afternoon when a promising prospect canceled their meeting, Nick found himself reaching for his old camera. He wandered the city's financial district, capturing the stark geometries of glass towers against the sky, the contrasts of light and shadow, the anonymous figures hurrying between meetings. The act of looking through the viewfinder, focusing on composition rather than profit projections, provided a release valve for his anxiety. He established a routine: work on Nexus during the day, photograph the city at dusk, and process the images at night when sleep eluded him. He created an Instagram account under a pseudonym, posting black and white urban landscapes that gradually gained a following. No one knew the melancholy cityscapes came from the former investment banker, now struggling to build his own financial firm. 3 months into his venture, Nick received a notification that a major client he'd hoped to bring from Blackstone had signed with another advisor. When he made a courtesy call to the client, the revelation was illuminating. "I'm sorry, Nick," the client explained uncomfortably. "Gerald Wagner reached out personally. He mentioned concerns about your emotional stability after the personal situation and suggested you might not be in a position to manage our portfolio effectively." Nick maintained his composure throughout the call, but afterward he slammed his fist against his desk, startling his sole employee, a recent finance graduate named Tyler. It wasn't enough that Gerald had betrayed his trust personally. Now he was actively undermining Nick's professional future. That evening, Nick's phone vibrated with a text from an unsaved number, though he immediately recognized it: Elisa. "I heard about your new company. I'm proud of you. Can we talk?" Nick stared at the message until the screen went dark, then deleted it without responding. The next day, flowers arrived at his office with a card bearing similar sentiments. He instructed Tyler to donate them to the hospital across the street. A week later, Nick was making a presentation to a community credit union board when a woman at the end of the table began asking pointed questions about his proposed fee structure and investment philosophy. "Your materials emphasize ethical investments," she said, "but your exclusion criteria seem standard. What exactly makes your approach different from greenwashing?" Nick blinked, caught off guard by both the directness and the insight of the question. "That's a fair challenge. I'd like to address that." For the next 15 minutes, he engaged with her increasingly specific questions about environmental impact metrics, community benefit assessments, and long-term sustainability. The rest of the board watched the exchange with interest. When the meeting concluded, the woman approached him. "Maya Patel," she said, extending her hand. "Environmental law attorney. I consult with the credit union on their community impact initiatives." "Nick Hardaway," he replied, noticing her firm grip and direct gaze. "Financial advisor. Apparently in need of stronger exclusion criteria." She smiled, the expression warming her serious features. "Your approach has potential, but your execution needs refinement. Most firms claim ethical standards while operating on the same old profit maximization principles. And you'd know better, I assume." "Actually, yes. I've sued 3 financial institutions for misrepresenting their environmental commitments." She handed him a business card. "If you're serious about doing things differently, my firm might be interested in a consultant relationship. We work with several ethical investment groups." Nick studied the card. "Maya Patel, Barton Environmental Justice Group. Why would you help me?" She gathered her materials, adjusting the strap of her messenger bag. "Because the financial system needs fundamental change, not just new players using the old rules. Call me if you're actually interested in being part of that change, rather than just using it as a marketing angle." As she walked away, Nick felt something shift inside him. For months, he'd been defining his new venture in opposition to his old life, to Gerald, to the betrayal. Maya's challenge reframed the question. What was he building toward, not just away from? He slipped her card into his pocket and felt for the first time in months, genuinely curious about what might come next. Nick spent 3 weeks developing a new investment approach following his conversation with Maya. He incorporated her suggested environmental criteria, added community impact assessments, and restructured the fee system to align incentives with client outcomes rather than transaction volume. When he presented the revised proposal to the credit union board, the transformation was evident. "This addresses every concern we raised," the board president said, reviewing the materials, "particularly the transparency in reporting and the realignment of fee structures. It's unlike anything the larger firms have offered us." Maya, present as the credit union's consultant, gave Nick an approving nod from across the table. Her skepticism had evolved into guarded respect over their numerous consultation sessions, during which Nick had demonstrated genuine willingness to rethink conventional financial practices. "We'd like to move forward with Nexus Financial Solutions," the president announced, extending his hand. "Starting with our Community Development Fund." At $50 million, the credit union's Community Development Fund represented a modest account by Blackstone standards, but for Nexus, it was transformative. The contract would provide stable revenue, legitimate credibility, and a proving ground for Nick's ethical investment model. Leaving the meeting, Nick felt lighter than he had in months. "I owe you for this," he told Maya as they walked to the parking garage. "You don't owe me anything," she replied. "You did the work. You were willing to challenge assumptions that most financial advisors treat as gospel." Nick's phone buzzed in his pocket. Another text from Elisa, the fifth that week. He ignored it, focusing instead on Maya's assessment of the presentation. Over the past month, Elisa's attempts to reconnect had grown more persistent. Calls, texts, emails, even a handwritten letter delivered to his office. Each message carried variations of the same theme: regret, explanations, pleas to talk. That evening, celebrating the credit union contract with Darius at a local restaurant, Nick's phone buzzed again. Darius raised an eyebrow as Nick silenced it without looking. "Still Eliza?" Nick nodded, taking a swig of his beer. "Why haven't you blocked her number?" Darius asked. "It's been, 5 months?" 4.5, Nick corrected automatically. "I don't know. Felt like she'd won somehow if I had to block her." Darius leaned forward. "That's stupid. She's living rent-free in your head every time the phone buzzes. Block the number and move on." Nick stared at his phone as it lit up with another incoming message. Without reading it, he navigated to his contacts, found Elisa's number, and pressed Block Contact. A simple confirmation dialog appeared. Nick hesitated for just a moment, then pressed Confirm. "There," he said, setting the phone face down on the table. "Done." Darius raised his glass. "To closing doors so new ones can open." The credit union contract provided Nexus with crucial stability. Nick hired 2 additional staff members, expanded their office space, and began actively pursuing new clients. His strategy of focusing on mission-driven organizations and community-focused investors was beginning to gain traction. 3 months after signing the credit union, Nick was presenting at a sustainable finance conference when he spotted a familiar face in the audience. Sophia Lin, head of emerging markets at Citadel Investments, and one of his primary rivals during his Blackstone days. They'd competed for several major accounts, with Nick usually emerging victorious, a fact that had created professional animosity between them. After his presentation on aligning profit motives with ethical outcomes, Sophia approached him at the refreshment table. "Interesting pivot, Hardaway," she said, selecting a cucumber sandwich. "From cutthroat corporate finance to champion of ethical investing. Very on trend." Nick tensed, prepared for the jab beneath her words. "It's not a marketing gimmick, Lynn. I've completely restructured the approach." She studied him for a moment. "I know. That's what makes it interesting. Your credit union model is genuinely innovative. Several firms are watching it closely, including mine." "Watching to copy or to undermine?" "Possibly both," she admitted with unexpected candor. "But personally, I'm intrigued. Citadel's board is pressing for an ESG division that's more than window dressing, and your model has real substance." They exchanged business cards, and over the following weeks, a surprising professional friendship developed. Sophia provided insights into how larger firms were responding to the ethical investment trend, while Nick shared his experiences developing authentic impact metrics. Their conversations helped Nick refine his business strategy, focusing on the unique value proposition that set Nexus apart from established firms merely adding green labels to conventional products. At a client dinner 6 months after founding Nexus, Nick found himself discussing success with a potential investor. "I used to measure it by salary and title," he admitted. "Now I evaluate each decision by asking whether it creates genuine value or just extracts it from somewhere else." It wasn't just talk. Nick had declined several high-profile clients whose requirements conflicted with Nexus's ethical framework, despite the potential revenue loss. Each decision reinforced the company's reputation for integrity. The financial press began taking notice. A respected industry publication featured Nexus in an article about disruptive models in wealth management. A business podcast invited Nick to discuss ethical investing. A regional business award nominated Nexus for innovation. The recognition brought new clients and, importantly, credibility within an industry initially skeptical of Nick's approach. It also brought renewed attention from Gerald Wagner. Nick's former mentor watched with growing concern as Nexus began attracting clients previously loyal to Blackstone. The breaking point came when Riverside Holdings, a mid-sized family office managing $300 million, announced they were transferring a significant portion of their assets to Nexus after 20 years with Blackstone. Gerald called Nick directly for the first time since the betrayal. "This has gone far enough," he said without preamble when Nick answered. "You made your point with this ethical crusade. It's time to stop poaching my clients." "I didn't poach anyone," Nick replied evenly. "Riverside approached us after reading about our community investment framework. And this isn't a crusade, Gerald. It's a business model that works." "Listen carefully," Gerald's voice hardened. "You're playing in waters too deep for you. Blackstone has relationships throughout the industry that you couldn't begin to understand. Step back from Riverside, or you'll find doors closing that you didn't even know existed." Nick ended the call without responding to the threat, but Gerald's warning proved prophetic. Within weeks, 2 prospective clients abruptly canceled meetings. A banking partner suddenly imposed additional requirements for Nexus's credit line. A scheduled speaking engagement was postponed indefinitely. The pattern was clear. Gerald was leveraging his considerable influence to isolate Nexus. Throughout this professional turbulence, Nick found himself increasingly drawn to Maya. Their initial consultant relationship had evolved into regular strategy sessions that often extended into dinner discussions about finance reform, environmental policy, and gradually personal histories. Nick learned about her childhood in a first-generation Indian-American family in Michigan, her decision to pursue environmental law against her parents' wishes, her passion for kayaking. He found himself sharing stories of his own upbringing, his abandoned photography passion, his disillusionment with traditional finance. After one particularly late dinner following a successful client meeting, Maya suggested a walk along the riverfront. Under a clear night sky, their conversation flowed effortlessly. When their hands accidentally brushed, Nick felt an electric awareness that had nothing to do with business strategy. "We work well together," Maya said as they paused to watch a passing boat. "We do," Nick agreed, suddenly conscious of their proximity. "I wasn't sure at first. I thought you might be another finance guy playing the ethical angle for profit." "What changed your mind?" "You listened," she said simply. "When I challenged your assumptions, you actually considered the criticism instead of defending the status quo." The moment hung between them, weighted with possibility. Nick found himself wanting to lean closer, to see if the connection he felt was mutual. Instead, he stepped back, gesturing toward the path ahead. "We should probably head back. Early meeting tomorrow." Maya studied his face for a moment before nodding. "Right. Always another meeting." The retreat came instinctively, a self-protected reflex. Despite the months that had passed, the memory of Elisa's betrayal remained a wound not fully healed. The prospect of vulnerability, of giving someone else the power to inflict similar pain, triggered an almost physical recoil. The following morning, Nick arrived at the office early to prepare for a client presentation. His assistant intercepted him at the door, looking uncomfortable. "There's someone waiting in your office," she said. "She wouldn't leave. Says she's your fiancée." Nick froze. "My what?" He pushed open his office door to find Elisa perched on the edge of his visitor chair, elegant as ever in a tailored dress, her hair swept into a smooth chignon. She stood when he entered. "Nick," she said, voice quavering slightly, "thank you for seeing me." "I didn't agree to see you," he replied, remaining by the door. "How did you get in here?" "I told your assistant I was your fiancée. Technically, we never officially broke the engagement." She attempted a smile that faltered under his cold stare. "Please, just give me 5 minutes." Nick glanced at his watch, calculating the time until his meeting. 3 minutes. "Then you leave?" Elisa nodded quickly. "I made a terrible mistake, Nick. The worst mistake of my life. What I did with Gerald was inexcusable. I've spent every day since regretting it and missing you." "Is that why you continued the affair for almost a year?" She flinched. I was confused. Gerald represented everything I thought I wanted: influence, connections to the art world, excitement. But it was hollow, Nick. What we had was real. I see that now. "Why are you here, Elisa?" "Your messages made your position clear. I chose not to respond." That should have been enough. "Because you block me everywhere," she said, a note of accusation creeping into her voice. "And because seeing you at that finance conference last month, hearing you speak about your company, I realized how much you've grown. You're building something meaningful, something true to who you really are. So now that I'm successful again, you're interested." The bitterness leaked through despite his efforts to maintain composure. "That's not fair," she protested. "I'm here because I love you. Because we had something worth fighting for. Gerald and I ended months ago. It was a mistake from the beginning." She took a step toward him, eyes glistening with tears. "I'm asking for a chance, Nick. One conversation. Dinner, maybe. To see if there's anything left to salvage." Nick studied the woman he'd once planned to marry. She was still beautiful, still compelling. But looking at her now, he felt something unexpected. Nothing. No anger, no longing, no regret. Just a hollow emptiness where passion had once resided. "Your 3 minutes are up," he said quietly. "Please leave." "Nick, please." She reached for his hand. "We were planning a life together." "And now I'm building a different one," he replied, stepping away from her touch. "Goodbye, Eliza." As he closed the door behind her, Nick realized that for the first time since the betrayal, he felt truly free, not just from Eliza, but from the weight of what might have been. Nick first noticed the whispers at an industry conference in early autumn. Conversations that stopped when he approached. Glances that lingered a beat too long. The subtle shift was confirmed when a journalist from Financial Weekly contacted him for comment on allegations regarding Nexus Financial's investment practices. "What allegations?" Nick asked, phone pressed to his ear as he paced his office. "We've received information suggesting that Nexus has been overstating the environmental impact of its investment portfolio," the journalist explained, "and that your ethical screening process is less rigorous than publicly claimed." Nick immediately recognized Gerald's handiwork. The claims were too specific, too precisely aimed at the heart of Nexus' reputation for integrity. "Those allegations are completely false," he stated firmly. "Our impact reporting is independently verified by third-party auditors. I can provide documentation." The journalist seemed unimpressed. "We've also heard concerns about potential conflicts of interest with certain board members at your client organizations. Would you care to address those?" Despite Nick's detailed rebuttals, the resulting article presented a thinly veiled hit piece. While technically including his responses, the framing left readers with the impression that Nexus was engaged in greenwashing, making superficial claims about ethical practices while operating like any other profit-driven firm. Similar stories appeared in other financial publications over the following weeks. None contained outright falsehoods that could be legally challenged, but collectively they created a cloud of suspicion around Nexus's business practices. The impact was immediate. A prospective investor from a large family foundation called to postpone their final meeting. "We need to conduct additional due diligence given recent media coverage," the representative explained diplomatically. "The foundation cannot risk association with potentially misleading ethical claims." Nick assured them that the allegations were baseless, but the hesitation had already taken root. The foundation, which would have been Nexus's largest client to date, ultimately chose another firm with a more established track record in impact investing. The loss hit Nick harder than he anticipated. He'd spent months cultivating the relationship, customizing an investment strategy that aligned perfectly with the foundation's mission. The rejection felt personal, validating his deepest fear, that his vision for Nexus was naive, unsustainable in an industry built on cynical self-interest. Maya noticed the change in his demeanor during their weekly strategy lunch. "You've been distracted today," she observed. "Is it the foundation decision?" Nick nodded, pushing his barely touched meal aside. "It makes me question everything we're building. If they believe those stories so easily, maybe our approach is too idealistic for this industry." "Or maybe they were just being cautious with their board's money," Maya countered. "One setback doesn't invalidate your model. It's not just the foundation. 2 other clients have requested extraordinary audits of our reporting processes. The credit union board is asking questions. This is exactly what Gerald wanted, to create enough doubt to unravel what we built." Maya reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "Then we fight back. I've dealt with corporate smear campaigns before. Let me help." The gesture of support, her hand warm against his, triggered an unexpected surge of panic in Nick. The genuine concern in her eyes, the implicit promise of standing together. It felt dangerous, reminiscent of promises Eliza had made before shattering his trust. He withdrew his hand abruptly. "I appreciate the offer, but this is my battle. Nexus is my responsibility." "Nick," Maya said carefully, "you don't have to handle everything alone. That's not strength, it's isolation." "I'm not looking for a savior, Maya," he replied, his tone sharper than intended, "or a partner. Our arrangement is professional, and I'd like to keep it that way." The hurt that flashed across her face was quickly masked by professional composure. "Of course, My mistake for overstepping. She signaled for the check. I should get back to my office. I have court preparations. Nick knew he'd handled it poorly, but the wall he'd constructed seemed necessary for survival. After Maya left, he texted an apology for his abruptness, keeping it professionally cordial. She responded similarly, and their subsequent interactions reverted to strictly business discussions, the warmth and personal connection carefully excised. With Maya's emotional support voluntarily sacrificed, Nick retreated into work with renewed intensity. He extended office hours, regularly staying until midnight, then continuing with reports and projections at his apartment until exhaustion claimed him. He canceled his weekly dinners with Darius, ignored calls from his parents, and abandoned photography entirely. His world contracted to the narrow focus of saving Nexus from Gerald's systematic undermining. The strategy yielded results. Nick personally visited every client, addressing concerns, providing additional transparency, reinforcing his commitment to their goals. Most were reassured, though the cloud of suspicion never fully dissipated. New client acquisition stalled, but the existing portfolio stabilized. Then came the news that threatened everything. Riverside Holdings, the former Blackstone client that had become Nexus's flagship account, informed Nick that they were considering a management restructuring. The details were vague, but industry rumors suggested that a major financial firm was orchestrating a board takeover that would redirect investment strategy. Nick couldn't prove Gerald's involvement, but the timing was too convenient. If Riverside changed management and withdrew their business, Nexus would lose 30% of its revenue overnight. Darius finally intervened, showing up at Nick's apartment unannounced on a Sunday morning after weeks of ignored messages. "You look like hell," he observed, pushing past Nick into the apartment. The space reflected its occupant's state of mind. Takeout containers stacked on counters, clothes draped over furniture, financial documents covering every flat surface. Darius surveyed the chaos with raised eyebrows. "I've been busy," Nick said defensively. "You've been hiding," Darius corrected, "and apparently starving yourself while overworking." Classic Hardaway crisis response. While forcing Nick to eat a proper meal, Darius extracted the full situation regarding Riverside Holdings and Gerald's suspected interference. "So Wagner's playing hardball," Darius summarized. "Not surprising, you're actually threatening his position at Blackstone by proving your model works. It won't matter if he succeeds with Riverside. Nexus can't survive that loss." "Then we need intelligence," Darius said decisively. "I know someone on Riverside's extended board. Let him make some calls." The information Darius gathered confirmed their suspicions. Gerald was indeed orchestrating a takeover attempt, leveraging his relationship with Riverside's chairman. But Darius's source revealed something unexpected. Gerald was acting independently, without Blackstone's formal backing. "Apparently, he's trying to prove himself after losing the Riverside account in the first place," Darius explained. "And there's something else you should know. The affair with Elisa ended badly months ago. She broke it off right after you found out, and relations between them have been hostile since. He blames her for damaging his standing at the firm." Nick absorbed this information with mixed emotions. The confirmation that Gerald was operating without institutional support offered a tactical advantage. The news about Elisa and Gerald's acrimonious split meant nothing to him personally, he told himself. That chapter was closed. 3 nights later, a thunderstorm lashed the city with driving rain. Nick was reviewing defensive strategies for the upcoming Riverside board meeting when his doorbell rang. Irritated by the interruption, he checked the security camera on his phone. The sight of Elisa standing in the hallway, drenched and shivering, stopped him cold. For several moments, he simply stared at the image. His first instinct was to ignore the bell, to leave her standing there until she accepted that he wanted no part of her. But something in her defeated posture, the way she leaned against the wall as if struggling to remain upright, triggered a reflexive concern he couldn't entirely suppress. Against his better judgment, Nick opened the door. Elisa looked up, rainwater dripping from her hair, mascara streaking beneath her eyes. She seemed smaller somehow, stripped of the polished confidence that had always defined her. "I know you don't want to see me," she said, voice barely audible above the storm. "But I didn't know where else to go." Nick hesitated, then stepped aside silently, allowing her to enter. He retrieved a towel from the bathroom and handed it to her without comment. "Thank you," she whispered, dabbing at her face and hair. "I wouldn't have come if I had any other option. My apartment is flooded, the whole first floor of my building." "You don't have friends to stay with?" Nick asked, maintaining emotional distance despite their physical proximity. "Not anymore," she admitted. "After everything happened, People took sides. Most of them were your friends first. The silence stretched between them, filled with unspoken history. Nick moved to the kitchen, pouring 2 glasses of water, a neutral offering. When he returned, Eliza had composed herself somewhat, though her elegant clothes remained sodden. "Gerald is trying to destroy your company," she said abruptly. Nick handed her the water. "I'm aware." "No, it's worse than you think. He's obsessed with ruining you. After I ended things, he blamed you for everything. His diminished standing at Blackstone, the collapse of our relationship, all of it." She took a shaky breath. "I've heard things, Nick. He's planning something for the Riverside meeting beyond the takeover attempt." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because it's my fault," she said, eyes filling with fresh tears. "Everything he's doing to you is because of my mistakes. I can't undo what I did, but I can warn you." As she spoke, the familiar scent of her perfume reached Nick, triggering a cascade of memories: their first date, lazy Sunday mornings, the easy intimacy they'd once shared. For a disorienting moment, he felt the pull of what had been, the comfort of the known. Eliza must have sensed the momentary softening. She moved closer, placing her hand lightly on his arm. "I miss you, Nick. Every day. I know I have no right to say that, but it's the truth. What I did was unforgivable, but if there's any chance, any possibility that you could consider letting me prove how much I've changed." The warmth of her touch, the familiar cadence of her voice, they created a dangerous illusion of homecoming. Nick found himself wavering, the emotional exhaustion of recent months making the prospect of forgiveness, of returning to something known, momentarily tempting. Her hand moved to his face, gentle against his cheek. "We could start over," she whispered. "Build something new, something honest this time." For a suspended moment, Nick allowed himself to imagine it: reconciliation, a return to the life he'd planned before everything shattered. The path of least resistance, a respite from the constant battle of building Nexus, defending his vision against Gerald's attacks. Then reality reasserted itself. The woman before him had lied for nearly a year, betrayed him with the person he trusted most professionally. The comfort she offered was an illusion, a retreat rather than a resolution. Nick stepped back, breaking the contact. "There's no starting over, Eliza. Too much has changed." Changed? Because of Maya?" she asked, a note of bitterness entering her voice. The question caught Nick off guard. "How do you know about Maya?" "Gerald mentioned her. Your environmental consultant." Eliza's gaze was sharp despite her vulnerable appearance. "Are you involved with her?" Nick felt a surge of protective anger at the mention of Maya's name in this context. "That's not your concern, and it's not relevant to this conversation. It is if you're rejecting a second chance with me because of feelings for someone else." "I'm rejecting a second chance because there isn't one to give," Nick stated firmly. "What happened between us can't be repaired. I've accepted that and moved forward. You should too." Eliza's expression hardened. "Move forward or just rebuilt the same walls higher?" "You're isolating yourself, Nick. Darius is worried about you. Your assistant mentioned you practically live at the office now. Has not moving forward a tiding?" The accusation struck uncomfortably close to home. Nick turned away, uncomfortable with her insight. "You should go. The storm is letting up. I'll call you a car." Alone after Eliza's departure, Nick faced the apartment that had become merely an extension of his office. Functional, impersonal, devoid of comfort. He'd been so focused on proving Gerald wrong, on saving Nexus, that he'd lost sight of why he started the company in the first place. Not just to create an ethical alternative in finance, but to build a life that reflected his authentic values, that allowed for genuine connection and purpose. Instead, he'd constructed a fortress against pain, excluding not just Eliza but everyone who cared about him. He pushed away Maya when she offered support, withdrawn from Darius, poured himself into work until nothing else remained. Was this really the life he wanted to salvage? A solitary crusade that mirrored the hollow achievement-obsessed existence he'd left behind? Nick stood at his window, watching the retreating storm, and confronted the possibility that in his determination to prove himself, he might have lost himself all over again. Nick woke before dawn, Eliza's words echoing in his mind. She'd been right about one thing: he had been hiding, retreating into work, rather than truly moving forward. The realization brought clarity rather than pain. During their encounter, beneath the momentary pull of familiarity, he'd made a profound discovery. He felt nothing for Eliza anymore. No love, no hate, not even resentment. The emotional tether that had bound them together, even after betrayal, had finally dissolved. This freedom from the past coincided with the urgent need to save Nexus from Gerald's machinations. Nick called Darius at 5:30 am. "I need your help," he said when Darius answered groggily. "And I need to apologize for disappearing on you." By 7, they were set up in Nick's office with strong coffee and a clear mission: to develop a counter-strategy for the Riverside Holdings situation. Nick outlined what he knew about Gerald's takeover approach. "He's targeting board members with promises of higher short-term returns," Nick explained, positioning Nexus as idealistic but financially underperforming compared to traditional models. "So we've proven wrong with numbers," Darius suggested. "Show them the actual performance." "Numbers won't be enough. Gerald's offering them comfort, or return to familiar territory with an established firm. We need to offer something bolder." They worked through the morning, analyzing Riverside's portfolio and industry positions. By afternoon, they'd identified a critical insight. Riverside's holdings included significant investments in emerging clean technology that aligned perfectly with Nexus's ethical framework, but were being managed conventionally. "We need Maya on this," Nick admitted. "Her environmental expertise is crucial for validating the approach." When he called her office, Maya's assistant informed him she was in court all day. Instead of leaving a message, Nick decided to wait in person. At 5:45 p.m., he spotted her exiting the courthouse, briefcase in hand, looking wearied but satisfied. "Maya," he called, approaching cautiously. She turned, surprise giving way to guarded politeness. "Nick, what are you doing here?" "I need your help with Riverside Holdings. But first, I owe you an apology." The words came easier than he expected. "I pushed you away when you offered support. That was wrong of me." "Professional courtesy doesn't require an apology," she replied stiffly. "This isn't about professional courtesy." Nick took a deep breath. "When you reached out, I panicked. Getting close to someone again felt dangerous after Eliza. But isolation isn't the answer. I've been hiding, and it's time to stop." Maya studied him, her expression softening slightly. "That sounds suspiciously like growth partaway." "Overdue growth," he acknowledged. "Will you hear me out about Riverside? I think we've found an approach that aligns perfectly with your environmental impact standards." Over dinner, Nick outlined the strategy they developed. Rather than competing with Gerald on traditional metrics, they would propose a comprehensive restructuring of Riverside's clean technology holdings, creating a dedicated impact fund that would generate both financial returns and measurable environmental benefits. "It's ambitious," Maya admitted, reviewing the preliminary numbers. "But the concept is sound. With proper implementation, this could outperform conventional management while creating genuine environmental value." "You're the only one who can validate the environmental metrics convincingly," Nick told her. "Will you present with me at the Riverside board meeting?" She hesitated. "Are you asking as a business associate?" "Yes," Nick replied honestly. "And as someone who values your perspective. Someone who missed having you in his life these past weeks." Maya's smile was cautious but genuine. "I'll need to review the complete portfolio data before committing." "I'll send everything tonight. And Maya, thank you. Not just for considering this, but for challenging me to be better all along." They worked intensively over the next 3 days, refining the proposal with input from Darius and Nick's team. On the 4th day, they presented to the Riverside board, directly opposite Gerald, who attended to promote Blackstone's competing offer. Gerald's presentation emphasized stability, tradition, and institutional backing. When he saw Maya seated beside Nick, a flash of surprise crossed his face, quickly masked by professional composure. Nick and Maya presented next, outlining their vision for transforming Riverside's environmental holdings into an industry-leading impact portfolio. Maya's expertise lent credibility to the environmental metrics, while Nick demonstrated how the approach would generate superior returns compared to conventional management. The board chairman, initially skeptical, grew increasingly engaged. "This is substantially different from your current management approach, Mr. Hardaway." "It represents an evolution," Nick acknowledged. "One driven by recognizing the unique potential in Riverside's existing holdings rather than forcing them into traditional models." Gerald interrupted, voice smooth with practiced concern. "The approach sounds innovative, but untested. Riverside needs established protocols, not experiments." "Actually," Maya interjected, "similar approaches have been implemented successfully in European markets. What's innovative here is applying these principles at Riverside's scale in North American markets." The deliberation continued for hours. When the board finally excused both parties to discuss privately, Gerald approached Nick in the waiting area. "Impressive performance," he said, voice low. Bringing your environmental consultant was a smart tactical move. But these people aren't idealists, Nick. They want security, not social impact experiments. Nick met his former mentor's gaze directly. They want results, Gerald. Something new that works better than something old that doesn't anymore. That's what I'm offering them. When the board reconvened, their decision was unexpected. They would retain Nexus for the specialized environmental portfolio, while keeping their general holdings with Blackstone. The compromise acknowledged the merit in both approaches while allowing Nick's innovative strategy a proving ground. It wasn't a complete victory, but it was enough to secure Nexus's position and demonstrate the viability of their approach. More importantly, it represented the first direct confrontation with Gerald that hadn't ended in retreat. As they packed up their presentation materials, the board chairman approached Nick privately. "Your former colleague fought hard against this arrangement," he said. "Made some concerning insinuations about your firm's practices. I'd advise vigilance going forward." "Thank you for the warning," Nick replied, "and for the opportunity to prove our model's value." Leaving the meeting, Maya squeezed Nick's arm supportively. "This is just the beginning. Once the first quarterly results come in, they'll see the full potential." Nick covered her hand with his, allowing himself to enjoy the simple human connection. "Thank you for standing with me today." "Partners should stand together," she replied with a meaningful glance. The partial victory with Riverside marked a turning point for Nexus. Nick maintained his commitment to the work while restoring balance to his life. He resumed weekly dinners with Darius, reconnected with his parents, and most significantly, began exploring the tentative connection with Maya that had been developing beneath their professional relationship. Their first official date, a sailing trip on the bay followed by dinner at a small neighborhood restaurant, felt both new and comfortable, free from the shadows of past relationships. When Maya asked about Eliza, Nick found he could discuss the betrayal without the sharp edge of pain that had accompanied it for so long. "I realized recently that I finally let it go," he told her. "Not just Eliza, but the person I was with her, always striving for external validation, always performing." "And who are you now?" Maya asked, genuinely curious. Nick considered the question, still figuring that out. But someone who values authenticity over appearances. Someone who wants to build something meaningful, both professionally and personally. 2 months after the Riverside presentation, Nick made a decision that surprised his team but felt instinctively right. He would host a charity fundraiser for environmental conservation, featuring his photography alongside works from established artists. The event would serve multiple purposes, raising money for causes aligned with Nexus's mission, demonstrating their commitment to community engagement, and reclaiming his abandoned passion. The gallery space transformed under Nick's direction. Its urban landscapes, stark black and white images capturing both the geometry of the financial district and the human moments within it, drew unexpected attention from attendees. A prominent arts blogger described them as revealing the soul beneath the sterile facade of capitalism, technical precision illuminating emotional truth. The evening was progressing smoothly when Nick spotted Gerald entering the gallery, Sophia Lynn surprisingly at his side. Nick approached them directly, determined to control the interaction. "Gerald, Sophia, welcome to our event." Gerald surveyed the crowded gallery with calculated assessment. "Quite a gathering, arts patronage, very strategic for client relationships." "It's a cause I believe in," Nick replied simply. "The networking benefits are secondary." Sophia shifted uncomfortably. "The photographs are remarkable, Nick. I didn't realize you were an artist." "Just an enthusiast with a good eye," Nick deflected. "Are you here together?" "Professional courtesy," Sophia clarified quickly. "We served on a panel earlier today." Gerald's attention had shifted to Maya, who was discussing one of the conservation projects with a donor across the room. "Your environmental consultant seems quite central to your operation these days." "Maya is a valued partner," Nick stated, emphasizing the word deliberately. "Be careful mixing business with pleasure, Nick," Gerald advised with false concern. "It rarely ends well, as you should know." Rather than rising to the bait, Nick smiled genuinely. "Thank you for your concern, Gerald, and for attending tonight. Your support for the Conservation Fund is appreciated." The exchange, brief but pointed, represented everything that had changed. Where once Gerald's insinuations would have provoked anger or defensiveness, Nick now felt only calm certainty in his choices. He'd excused himself politely and rejoined Maya, leaving Gerald momentarily off balance by the lack of reaction. As the event reached its peak, Eliza made her entrance, stunning in a designer dress that drew immediate attention. Nick had known she might attend, Her professional connections to the art world made it likely, but seeing her approach with determined purpose still required a deep breath. "Your photographs are extraordinary," she said by way of greeting. "You always had talent, but these show real evolution." "Thank you," Nick replied, maintaining comfortable distance. "I'm glad you could attend." "Not just attend," she corrected, voice lowering. "I came to see you. To tell you I'm still thinking about us, about what could be. Seeing all you've built, how you've grown, it only confirms what I've always known about your potential." Before Nick could respond, Eliza continued, her composure slipping slightly. "I made a terrible mistake. We both know that. But people do truly connect the way we did deserve a second chance. We could start fresh, Nick. I'm asking you, one last time, to consider what we could build together now." The gallery seemed to quiet around them, though Nick knew it was only his perception narrowing to this moment. He looked at Eliza, truly looked at her, and felt an unexpected wave of compassion. Not love, not desire, just human recognition of another person's pain. "Eliza," he said gently, "I forgive you. I need you to know that. But forgiveness doesn't mean rebuilding something that's fundamentally broken. We want different things. We always did beneath the surface." "That's not true," she protested. "We wanted the same future." "We wanted the idea of each other," Nick corrected. "I wanted the polished, perfect life you represented. You wanted the security and status I provided. That's not enough for either of us." Tears welled in Eliza's eyes. "You changed." "We both have," Nick acknowledged, "and that's necessary. I hope you find what you're really looking for, Eliza. I truly do." He watched her walk away, feeling not victory or vindication but simple closure. When Maya approached moments later, he accepted her hand naturally, their fingers intertwining without hesitation. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Better than okay," Nick replied honestly. "Perfect timing for that dance you promised me." 6 months later, Nexus Financial Solutions had expanded to new offices overlooking the bay. The Riverside environmental portfolio had outperformed projections by 12%, validating Nick's innovative approach and attracting attention throughout the industry. Trade publications that had once questioned Nexus's viability now featured profiles of their disruptive model. The most significant development came when Sophia Lynn approached Nick with an unexpected proposal. Frustrated by Citadel's reluctance to embrace genuine ethical investing, she wanted to join Nexus as a partner, bringing her expertise in emerging markets and several key clients. "Are you sure?" Nick had asked during their initial discussion. "Your career trajectory at Citadel is secure." "Secure but limited," Sophia replied. "What you're building here represents the future of finance. I want to be part of that future, not clinging to outdated models." With Sophia's addition, Nexus achieved a critical mass that solidified its position as an industry innovator rather than an outlier. Her institutional knowledge complemented Nick's vision and Maya's environmental expertise, creating a leadership team uniquely positioned to transform investment approaches. Maya's role had evolved as well. Beyond her environmental consulting, she'd become an integral voice in Nexus's strategic planning. Her perspective constantly challenged the team to evaluate decisions against both financial and ethical metrics. Her relationship with Nick had deepened naturally, based on mutual respect and shared values, rather than the performative perfection that had characterized his time with Eliza. On the evening of Nexus' one-year anniversary, Nick hosted a celebration at the gallery where they'd held their first fundraiser. The space was filled with clients, team members, supporters, and friends, a community that had formed around the company's mission. In the gallery's back office, Nick paused before joining the celebration. On the desk lay a photograph he'd carried for years, himself and Eliza at their engagement party, smiling the perfect smiles of people playing roles they thought they wanted. He studied it one last time, acknowledging both the genuine hope and the fundamental dishonesty it represented. Carefully, Nick placed the photo in a box labeled "Simply Past" and closed the lid. The gesture wasn't dramatic or angry, just the quiet recognition of a chapter completed. When he entered the main gallery, he was immediately surrounded by the reality he'd created. Darius arguing good-naturedly with Sophia about technology investments, his parents chatting with Maya, whom they'd embraced instantly, team members celebrating their collective achievement. Nick stepped to the front of the room and tapped his glass for attention. The crowd quieted, turning expectantly toward him. 1 year ago, Nexus existed only as an idea that ethical investment could generate returns while creating genuine value. Many people told me it was impossible. He smiled at the knowing chuckles from the audience. Tonight proves otherwise, but our success isn't measured just in portfolios and returns. It's in the connections we build, the values we maintained, and the authenticity we bring to our work each day. He raised his glass, looking around at the faces that had become his true community. To Nexus, not just a company, but a different way forward. As applause filled the room, Maya appeared at his side, slipping her hand into his. Nice speech, very inspiring. Too much? He'd asked with a self-deprecating smile. Just enough, she assured him. Perfectly authentic. Nick squeezed her hand, knowing with quiet certainty that the path forward, with its challenges and uncertainties, its risks and rewards, was exactly where he needed to be.